All right. Good evening, everybody. We want to thank those of you that are already on. We're going to be getting started in just a minute or two here. We're going to let some other folks join us. We also just tweeted out the link to the Zoom from at Fair Districts VA. So those of you on Twitter, feel free to retweet it so that more people can see and join us. And we'll get started in just a few minutes.
I see Alex is on. He's been doing fantastic work at the polls and calls and everything else. So welcome, Alex.
That's my constituent.
I also think I see super volunteer Helen Rose on there as well.
She is fantastic.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. And those of you who are watching this on YouTube later, thank you for watching on YouTube. We're here tonight to discuss Amendment 1 that is on your ballot. Some of you may have already voted, some of you maybe have not, but you definitely know people that haven't voted yet. And that's the important part we're going to talk about tonight, is who you need to talk to about Amendment 1 and what happens when Amendment 1 fails. I am going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Tierra Ward, who's going to give us an intro, and then we'll get started.
Well, thank you so much, Trevor. So coming at you guys live tonight, we have a host of delegates, some I'm sure you're familiar with, and some you'll get to know as we go through this call. So we have Delegate Marcia Price, Delegate Marcus Simon, Delegate Lashrecse Aird, and Delegate Mark Levine. And together with myself and Trevor, we've been working with fair districts in your Commonwealth, trying to make sure you guys have all of the information you need to make sure you vote no on Amendment 1. So with that, we began about early August with little support, little funding, big dreams. And so with those three things combined, we've been able to make a huge dent in what was once a majority, like what was the percent, Trevor? Something in the 70s, how they thought this would go over. And we're down to about the 30s at this point, as far as what they're thinking we can actually do. So we are doing really, really great. We're a grassroots organization that has just been chugging along with small dollar donors, with local help, with just grassroots volunteers and people like yourself helping us along the way. So with that being said, we are going to turn it right over and begin with questions. So just to kick us off, to get everybody loosened up, I'll start with the first question. First question is, the language says that a citizen shall chair the commission and it's half citizens. So isn't that a step forward from 100% redistricting by politicians?
So it is not. No, it definitely is not, because all of the citizens are chosen by the party leaders, just like all the legislators are chosen by the party leaders. So it really is like 4 party leaders in the room drawing all the districts. The other 12 are mere window dressing, or what Congressman Bobby Scott calls lipstick on a pig. It's made to look fair, but it's not. I'm sorry, you won't be able to apply unless you're maybe the spouse of a party leader, or their child, or maybe their good colleague or work partner, best friend. 4 party leaders choose all. And actually, that's a step backwards, because when the legislature chooses, at least more than 4 voices get a voice. But of course, all of us here on this call support a nonpartisan independent citizens commission to choose, and no legislators to be in the process. And we think we can achieve that if the amendment fails.
I can just add real quick. I'm sort of the parliamentarian in the group, and so the rules guy, right? So what does the chairman even do, right? I mean, in this particular situation, in order for a map to pass, it's got to get a supermajority. It's got to get 6 out of 8 senators and 6 out of 8 legislators, 6 out of 8 citizens. And the big thing is that any 2 legislators from any house can veto all the maps. So the chairman doesn't really have a lot of authority. Great, we'll have a citizen who will schedule the next meeting date, right? He'll hold the gavel and decide what order people get to speak in, right? But beyond that, the chairman doesn't have any special authority. So the idea that this is citizen-led is just misleading. I think it's intentionally misleading on the part of the proponents of the amendment. The citizen there, it's a figurehead. It's purely a figurehead. If you understand power and negotiations and how these decisions get made, you know the real power is with the legislators, and that's by design. The legislators are not really, they're creating the illusion of giving up power through this amendment, but they really don't.
And I just want to put a fine point on what Delegate Levine and Delegate Simon have stated, which is if you're asking about the chairperson being a citizen of this commission, you're entirely losing sight of what we've been fighting for decades, which is to remove legislators from even being part of the map drawing process. So when you couple a citizen being the chair with the idea that isn't this a step in the right direction, it completely is not. The whole point of redistricting reform has always been to allow voters to choose their legislators and not the other way around. And as long as legislators are a part of this process, and furthermore, what Delegate Levine and Delegate Simon have described, which is actually controlling the process and manipulating how it plays out, this will always be a step in the wrong direction, especially since it's going in our Constitution.
And I just want to add some of that funny math that we've been talking about, where you have these 16 people, right? And I am thinking about a democratic process where a majority rules. However, it doesn't matter who's the chair. If you have a situation where 14 people can agree to a map, including all 8 of the citizen members, and the map can still fail if those 2 legislators from the same chamber, from the same party, end up saying no. So you end up with a 14-2 vote that can be a killer for a map. So that means 2 legislators have more power than all 8 citizens combined. And those are their friends, by the way. So that's why I say citizen. It's like we said, it's not just regular citizens that you think you can just roll up and be on it. But 14-2 and the map can fail. And that's what you have to read this information. So it says the 8 and the 6 and the 8 and the 6. But if you look at it that way, the flip side of that means 14-2, it can fail. That is not citizen led by any stretch of the imagination.
So for those of you in the audience, I know a couple of you have found the Q&A area. If you have questions, you can type them into the Q&A area and our panel will answer them. Our next question is going along talking about sort of how the commission is made. Can you talk about the role of retired judges in the citizen selection process? The person says they're confused about that role.
I would argue that's more lipstick on a pig. So what happens is the leaders, the party leaders, choose a list of their 16 friends and family members, right? Their best friends, their spouses, their kids, their business partners. And then the judges winnow down their list to 2. And the party leaders choose the judges too. They choose 4, the 4 choose the 5th. But the fact that they winnow it down really doesn't mean much. So that's why I don't talk about it very much. You know, if Trump were to choose as his panel, oh, I don't know, Ivanka and Corey Lewandowski and Jared and maybe Roger Stone, and judges that Trump chooses, let's say Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, narrow that down to 2, is it really taking away from the fact that Trump controls the commission? I don't think so. Whether the judges choose Corey Lewandowski or they choose Ivanka really doesn't matter. So the judge's role is to make it look fair, to make it look like the judges are making a decision that really matters. But in essence, they're winnowing it down from all the party leaders' choices to fewer of the party leaders' choices.
Anybody else have anything to add on that one? Nope. Awesome. Our next question is, what happens after Amendment 1 fails? Are we just back to gerrymandering as usual?
So I'll say no, because that's one of the other talking points from the other side that's just so frustrating. It's like we're not dealing with reality. So beyond whatever happens with this amendment, AKA when we kill it, the bill that went into effect July 1st was the fourth time that I had tried to get a criteria bill passed. And it passed this time because guess what? Democrats were in charge and every single Democrat voted for it. Every single Republican voted against it. That's three things. It makes illegal for any of the maps to have political, racial, or prison gerrymandering. So stop, full stop right there, period. We are trailblazing in that area as it pertains to what other types of legislation are being passed across the country. So it doesn't deal with anything else other than what the maps should and should not look like. And then this other conversation that we're having about who should do it. Well, this is a bill that went into effect, and so now it's a law. You don't need anything else right now in order for the 2021 process to happen without political, racial, or prison gerrymandering. Actually, the lawyers that work for the General Assembly have already started to get the addresses for where some of the those that are incarcerated, currently incarcerated, where they live, because they're going to be counted back at their homes. So this process is already in place. It already went into law July 1st. The other thing is that this amendment says that you have to have like 3 public meetings. All of the meetings that we have for the Privileges and Elections Committee are public. They're also recorded for subcommittee and for committee. Because of the work of the Transparency Caucus, subcommittee meetings are online and streamed now. Thank you, Delegate Levine. So this idea that we go all the way back to 2011 and the wheeling and the dealing that happened with that, it's just not true. There is a bill in place, a law that says that we cannot gerrymander. What we are trying to say is, cool, that's in place. Let's also work on these other things. Let's work on either a legislative or executive order in order for us to get a citizen commission now that will run this process while we work on a better amendment that addresses all of the issues that we're raising, get that passed in 2021, 2022, and then get that back out to the people. But this is not an all or nothing situation. There are things in place that will prevent gerrymandering, which the amendment does not do. So we're already ahead of the amendment without even passing it.
Got it. Anything else that anyone wants to add before we move on to the next question? We can.
For some reason, Delegate Aird, we can't hear you. I think
We
maybe
hear a
your
wind
audio
tunnel,
is connected.
Delegate Aird. Aw.
And I
So
feel like
sad.
the next question is such a you question. Oh, I've heard that there's new language that takes care of any concerns about Black and Brown Virginians not being represented. Is that true? Delegate Aird, you want to test your sound again for that?
Well, you're muted at the moment.
Unmute it first. Just
So she's gonna try and leave and come back. But what I know my seatmate would have said is, that's not true. Show us, where is the language? Where is the language? Because what you are voting on right now is the language. All of these props and fireworks that people are spouting off on the sidelines would just be legislation, which means should there be a change in power, that could go away. Delegate Aird.
Testing.
Yes, go for it, girl.
What was the question?
there is supposed to be new language that takes care of any concerns around Black and Brown Virginians not being represented. And we wanted to know, was that true?
Absolutely false. And if anyone tells you that otherwise, they are misleading you and deceiving you. I think that it's been interesting to hear how there is this language, this magical language that's going to appear that's going to, 1, make this amendment better, and then number 2, ensure that Black and Brown voices are represented, And the short version of that is no. And so, full stop, just no, it's not true.
And I think we've got a couple of people that have asked a similar question. And so the follow-up to that one would be is, why don't you trust Democrats? Why don't you trust Louise Lucas and Eileen Fillicorn to ensure that there's diversity on the commission?
I can just jump in on this really quickly. The other part of that is, so Democrats are in charge right now. You have great well-intended leaders that are going to be part of this process right now, but we're talking about the Constitution, which means this is forever. This is 2021, this is 2031, this is 2041. And I don't know about you, but I don't have a crystal ball to say who the leadership will be at that time. And quite frankly, you shouldn't ask Black and brown communities to just trust that an individual is going to be responsible enough to ensure that we have diversity there. We should be able to point to the words. And this was going to be the point I was going to make about what Delegate Price says. She usually always says this, which is that if you cannot find the words, if you cannot see it, it's not there. There is a history of redistricting being used in the Commonwealth of Virginia, as well as throughout our country, to really dilute the voices of Black and brown communities. And so with that history in place, to now ask us to trust that singular individuals are going to do the right thing and that we can depend on that forever, it's not only fair, but it's short-sighted. It's not only unfair, but it's very much short-sighted.
The part of that question that burns me up too is it's often framed this way. Well, if the commission's not diverse, you'll have Speaker Fillicorn and President Pro Tem Lucas to blame, right? It'll be the Democrats' fault that it's not, because there's apparently no expectation at all that the Republicans are going to appoint anything but 2 white men from the Senate and 2 white men from the House. I mean, how does that work? So, I mean, it's not an issue of fault, A, but B, it's just this assumption that Democrats will provide the fairness, the diversity, the representation, and Republicans will do what? I mean, what they've always done, which is look out for themselves. How is that a fair commission, a fair setup to begin with? So anyway, that question drives me crazy for a variety of reasons.
And this is an overall problem with the amendment entirely, right? The proponents of the amendment say, look, we know the amendment's flawed. We know it does all these bad things, but if you pass all this legislation, you put the rubber bands in and the bubble gum and the paper clips, we can make it not so bad as it otherwise would be. And what we say is, why are you putting it there in the first place? This is a permanent thing. If you want legislation to deal with 2021, we have Delegate Price's excellent bill as to how you gerrymander. We're about to talk about who could be on the commission, how we set up an independent commission. We can do things legislatively for 2021, but you shouldn't throw something in the Constitution just to get something done in 2021. We can do that by legislation. You should put in the Constitution what we want to be in the Constitution. If you claim, I saw someone online today say, well, she really wants a nonpartisan citizens commission, so she's going to vote for the amendment. The voting for the amendment would kill a nonpartisan citizen commission. It goes exactly the opposite. If that's your goal, vote no on the amendment, vote yes for legislation, and let's craft a good amendment for the future.
All right, our next question is, how can we assure voters that there are votes in the House and the Senate to pass a citizens-only advisory commission when no such proposal made it out of committee in 2020? And Delegate Levine, I see you've indicated you want a shot at this one first.
It actually follows very nicely from where I was going. So there's 2 ways to stop gerrymandering. There's the how and the who. One is how you draw the lines. And Delegate Price's excellent bill, which is now law, it's not just a bill, it's law, passed into law July 1st of 2020, deals with the how really well. And we talked a little bit about that, how it prevents partisan political gerrymandering, it ensures racial and ethnic diversity, protects communities of interest, stops prison gerrymandering, racial gerrymandering, all of that. That's the how. But the other question is who, and it's an important question too. So even if all of us are required to be fair, according to Delegate Price's law, who actually draws the lines? So you could either have the amendment, which, as Delegate Simon points out, allows 2 Republicans to kill it, and then the whole thing dies and it goes to a Republican appointed body, the Virginia Supreme Court, to draw the lines. Or you can have the legislature draw the lines, or you can have what we prefer, a nonpartisan citizens commission to draw the lines. So the questioner says, well, wait a minute, You couldn't get a nonpartisan citizens commission in 2020. What makes you think you could do it in 2021? And it's a fair question. Well, we couldn't do it in 2020 because only about 90% of Democrats supported it. It passed the House, but all Republicans opposed it because Republicans know that Amendment 1 allows them to put their thumb on the scales because it says to kill it, and it goes to this Republican appointed body. So we didn't get any Republican support. It passed the House, barely failed in the Senate. But now I want you to think about 2021. If the amendment fails, the political dynamics change. The Republicans had a choice in 2020 before a system that favored them and a fair system. Those were their two choices. They chose the system that favored them. If it fails, the choices will be between a fair system and, frankly, one that favors Democrats, because if Democrats appoint everybody, that would favor Democrats. So the question is, would Republicans prefer a fair system or one that favors Democrats? And I think once you ask the question, the answer is obvious. I don't know any Republican that would prefer a system where the Democrats appoint the folks over the fair system. So with all the Republicans supporting it, and frankly, with 90% of the Democrats supporting it, it should pass easily. My guess is it will pass unanimously. And I actually have a bottle of bourbon writing on this because Delegate Miyares said it will never happen. I said it has to happen. So no, if the amendment fails, there's no question we will get an independent, nonpartisan citizens commission.
And then our next question, Delegate Price, I think you wanted to answer this one, sort of a similar question. It says at this point, the earliest a different constitutional amendment could be on the ballot is November of 2022 to apply to the next redistricting cycle in 2031. It's taken decades to get to this point. Why kick the can down the road when we can get a foot in the door now?
So I love this question because I love to remind you what we were fighting for that decades. What we were fighting for was independent redistricting. It was true reform. It was what One Virginia 2021 was founded on. It was what senators who have since passed were fighting for. This is not that. The moment that we sat at the table and sold out the value of the movement, of what it is that we were trying to go for, that's the moment that this was actually kicking it down the road. I apologize in a sense, it wasn't my doing, but I apologize that we aren't at a moment where we can celebrate having successfully gotten to an independent commission. But where we are now is at an additional crossroads where we can choose to put 8 legislators and 8 of our friends at the table and be even further from independent redistricting for the rest of my lifetime, if not further. Or we can say no, and though it may take an additional step, actually get to that, what it is that we've been fighting for this long time.
And this actually follows up a little bit on what I said before, because I want you to think about, I gave you the dynamic if the amendment fails. Let me give you the same dynamic if the amendment succeeds. If the amendment succeeds, Republicans know they've got an amendment that favors them. And there are a few Democrats that don't support an independent commission. That's true. They have enough votes to kill reform forever. If the amendment fails, the votes are there to do a nonpartisan independent commission. If the amendment succeeds, your hope for a nonpartisan independent commission is forever dead because we don't have the votes to pass any further changes then.
And also, this constitutional amendment and redistricting generally has always been about representation. And I just want to put a fine point on the fact that, is it really kicking the can down the road if you can get an amendment that ensures fair and equitable representation of Black and Brown communities? Because ultimately what you're saying is you'd rather settle for this because you have the privilege of not worrying about your representation being impacted. Meanwhile, you have communities that are all around you that risk losing that same representation.
All right, so we have 2 questions that Delegate Simon has indicated he'd like to answer. The first one deals with, is it possible to expand the courts? And I think you're talking about SCOTUS there. And if that happens, can we overturn gerrymandering and therefore put an end to SCOVA's ability to permanently gerrymander should the amendment pass?
Well, I read that question a little differently. We'll see if I missed the point. In Virginia, you can also, Virginia actually, the Constitution does provide for a Supreme Court of between 7 and 11 members. Right now we have 7. You could go to 11, but it takes 3/5 vote of both houses at 2 successive sessions to increase the size of the court. So is that, we drafted our Virginia, I'm going to nerd out for a second, but our Virginia Constitution was drafted in the 1970s after FDR and the court packing issue of the U.S. Supreme Court. So we kind of knew that there was this issue of how do you set the size of the Supreme Court, and how easy and how difficult do you make it to adjust the size of the Supreme Court. We're all, very much interested in talking about this as Democrats, a lot of us, because of what's happening at the U.S. Supreme Court. So the state Supreme Court has a way to do that, but it's frankly about as difficult, actually a little more difficult than amending the Constitution itself. So it would be easier to repeal the amendment than it would be to add seats to the state Supreme Court to try and keep them from doing a permanent gerrymander like Mark has suggested. Now, I mean, eventually these folks they don't have lifetime appointments. So the best way, if you wanted to get some turnover at the Supreme Court of Virginia, would be to have Democrats win elections and eventually be able to replace these folks as their terms run out. But that requires us to have fair districts where we have a fair shot of running. So I don't know that court packing is the answer. I think the better answer is to vote no on the amendment now and stop it from getting into the Constitution. And speaking of the Constitution, Trevor, if I can just jump straight to Josh's question, it's a great question, which is given Article 7, Section 1. So what that says, and Mark Levine and I both looked at this early on in the process, that section says that it's got some weird phrasing. It says to become a part of the Constitution, amendment has to pass both houses of the General Assembly in 2 successive sessions with an election in between. And then it goes on to say that it's got to pass, sorry, one second, I'm on the wrong section. It says it's got to get if it fails to get a majority of the votes cast, right? So it's got, in order to pass, that's get a majority of the votes cast. Well, what does that mean, right? Does that mean we get all the undervotes as no's? And so you can have somebody vote, you get 1 million votes for yes and 950,000 votes for no, but there's 800,000 people that didn't vote on it at all. And do we get all those in our column? And we could certainly ask the AG for an advisory opinion, but I think what Mark and I said was, let's look and see if there's any precedent for this. Let's go back and look to see, has this happened before and what was the outcome? So I think that's probably the first thing the AG would do, would be to say, how has this been interpreted in the past? And the fact is, I think on more than one occasion, we found that there were actually some pretty close constitutional amendments where it got 50% of the votes cast on the question of whether the Constitution should be amended or not, didn't get all the votes cast in that election because there was a lot more other issues in the election. And those things are currently part of our Constitution. So it's a great point and certainly something we thought about. I don't know, we could ask for an opinion. I don't know we'd get much traction there, given that you can just go back and look and say, hey, this is the way we've always done it. Mark, do you have anything to add to that? Does that sound right to you?
The short answer is it's ambiguous, but we can't rely on it, and we have to encourage people to vote no. And that Marcus Simon needs to learn his Roman numerals since it's Article 12, not Article 7.
So I did want to add something related, but not the same point, but that is of the United States Supreme Court. So when the Golden Bethune-Hill case went all the way to the Supreme Court, a lot of people think that we got the changes in districts because the Supreme Court upheld the Voting Rights Act. And that's not what happened. What happened was they agreed with the lower court that race was the main determining factor of the maps. So there is no current reiteration of how the new Supreme Court feels about the Voting Rights Act should any of the court cases get to them. But our newest Supreme Court justice would not even answer the question in the hearing about how she felt about the Voting Rights Act or her thoughts about it. So here is where we're in a precarious situation where, I mean, of the folks on the call, if you don't understand why the Voting Rights Act is still needed in 2020, that's a separate conversation, but it is. And it is an act that does not even have the votes right now to get reauthorized, meaning that Congress states in both chambers, we agree that this is needed and this is good. But that is a lower legal standard as a law than it is in the Constitution. So if you take that down to the Virginia Constitution, it is constitutionally mandated right now that our districts be compact. So that has a higher legal standard that the district have a certain shape than it actually be used to protect against racial gerrymandering. And so what we're saying is, let's not repeat the history of 1965 where it was an act. Let's put it in the Constitution and make it as much, if not more of a priority than what the district looks like, that it's not being used to suppress a certain group of people. And so that's another reason why these legal things that people are saying, we can pass this law, we can pass this law, whatever, it doesn't have the same standard and it can be overturned should somebody else get in power.
Great.
Delegate, were you saying something? She was muted. I wasn't sure. Okay. I would just say while I'm here, on the Voting Rights Act, but please remember that in the Shelby v. Holder case, the United States Supreme Court basically tore apart most of the Voting Rights Act. Now, this is a bill passed by Congress. As I recall, I think it was 98-0 in the Senate, so it was passed overwhelmingly by Congress. And the Supreme Court still said, if you read the opinion, it's really kind of gross. It's the one that actually the dissent by Ruth Bader Ginsburg got her called the notorious RBG. It basically says racism is over in the United States and we don't have to worry about it anymore. And therefore we don't need it anymore. And therefore we're just going to overturn what Congress did. So this idea that we can rely on the Supreme Court to keep the United States Supreme Court to keep or the Virginia Supreme Court to keep our rights is really weak. And that's why we need to put express language in the Constitution and do it right in the future.
All right, so right now we've only got one more question left in the queue. So just want to remind anybody, if you've got any questions, use the Q&A feature and you can get your question answered tonight. The question is, it's a two-parter. So the first part is, can you explain the difference between a constitutional amendment and legislation? And the second part is, I hear the yes side say, if it passes, they can use a bunch of legislation to make it better, like 1255. But the Constitution supersedes legislation, correct? So if the amendment passes, does that make 1255 not relevant to the line drawing process?
So I have real concerns about whether or not 1255 would prevent Amendment 1 from doing anything, because the amendment, if you read it, and what the amendment says is the district shall be established by the Supreme Court. Doesn't say according to law. It doesn't say according to standards set up by the General Assembly. It says none of those things. And this is particularly concerning because if you look at Article 6, which defines the judiciary in the Virginia Constitution, it says very clearly that that they have an original jurisdiction. And by the way, none of this is original jurisdiction. And they have appellate jurisdiction based on what we, the General Assembly, give them. So we can restrict their appellate jurisdiction. We can't restrict their original jurisdiction. This is not original jurisdiction, and this is not appellate jurisdiction. In fact, it's not in Article 6 at all. This is the only time the Virginia Supreme Court is mentioned in the legislative section. The Virginia Supreme Court is not acting as a court. It would be acting under Amendment 1 as a super legislature. Only it'd be the only legislature that could never be overturned because it couldn't be overturned in the courts. You can't sue the Virginia Supreme Court and Virginia court. It can't be overturned in the federal courts because the US Supreme Court said you can do as much partisan political gerrymandering as you want. So the amendment sets up no standards. And because constitutions generally trump legislation, in fact, they always trump legislation if there's a conflict between them, I'm concerned they wouldn't be restricted at all. The only way we know that 1255 will work is if this amendment is struck down. And then we're sure that it will work.
And I'll just add, the lawyers get to talk, the lawyers speak and all. And then I just want to reiterate the last point that Delegate Levine made. What is clear that no one can dispute is what happened in session in 2020, where every single sitting Republican voted against their opportunity to support ending political, racial, and prison gerrymandering. In addition to the fact that they failed to produce, support, and pass any of that same type of legislation for the 20 years that they were in power. So they are telling you who they are and what they care about, what their values are. When their leader says, oh, if all of them get to vote, we'll never win. Suppression is real. We would like for the opportunity to prevent that sort of suppression through gerrymandering, but have it in the amendment, not at the will of the group that is in power at that time.
And I literally just want to say that last point that Delegate Price made, the will of the group in power at that time. I think it's extremely dangerous to try to depend on state legislation that is subject to the will of the group in power at that time to fix what is permanently in our Constitution. You, as Virginians, we should not have to worry about the flux from year to year or cycle to cycle, if you will, of a bill, a law staying in place that can be changed annually, quite frank, to impact our map drawing process. I think that's dangerous. It's poor governing. And that is literally just a bad way to think about how this should work.
Got it. Well, again, thank you all for joining us tonight. I wanted to just ask quickly, delegates, did you guys have any last final points before we close out? Was there anything to go unsaid? We have a few more days left of early voting, and when we have election day on Tuesday. So any last words?
Yeah, I do. One of the things that we haven't talked about that's really important for me is to really follow the money. So a lot of people are mad at me in my mentions and in my social media because they're like, why didn't you tell us sooner? So Delegate Aird and I have been telling y'all this for 2 years now, but we're not gonna be mad. It's fine. Welcome to the conversation. But what is so disheartening is the amount of money that is coming into this conversation from outside of the boundaries of the Commonwealth. So whether you have 500,000 coming from an oil tycoon from Texas, or you have the Republican Party supporting this, like, we don't have that kind of money to put up against, all of this that is frou-frou. Like, you're getting flossy, flyers and things, but what they can't pay for is the truth. And the truth is that this amendment is not ready to go into our Constitution. The other side has admitted to its flaws in committee and in their own conversations about it, but they're willing to pay the cost of leaving communities that are vulnerable to gerrymandering behind in order to get a win. National organizations are weighing in on this. They don't have to deal with the consequences. They don't live in Virginia. You got Jennifer Lawrence. I don't even know if she had read the script before she's reading it off on Twitter. That is not how we need this to be. This is true Virginians that live here getting the power through an independent commission, and we cannot do that without your voting no and then us getting to the rest of the process.
I just want to close with, or for my closing remarks, I just want to say, when we took the vote on this constitutional amendment, I think this was the first time I ever had a tear drop from my eye. And that is because of how serious this is. I actually have great pain in my heart for so many Virginians who are voting on this constitutional amendment and literally have been told something that is completely untrue. I, in closing, want to say to you, we can still win this fight at the polls. There are still so many Virginians that have an opportunity to vote that do not know the truth about this amendment. I ask that if you are here tonight and you have heard from us and you agree that this is not the right approach to take, please talk to your friends, your neighbors, your family members. If you are able, actually consider volunteering at your polling place to make sure that they know that their representation is on the line. And so I just want to put a call to action now that if you can help in any way, you heard at the opening of this call that this is a grassroots movement. I don't want to see Virginians wake up the day after the election, and when they learn what this constitutional amendment is really about, what it really stands for, and how it will impact them, I don't want them to have regret. And so we need your help to do that. And I just appreciate you for being on the call tonight.
So I can see that some of the folks on the call are already doing the work. Alex and Michael and Ben, a shout out to all of you. I know what you've done working in Alexandria. And here's what they would tell you if they were in the room, because I've done it too. The yes vote is really squishy, all right? When you're at the polls, and I've now done this more times than I can count, I probably a dozen times. You go there, you stand at the polls, and people come up, and you say, you know, Democratic Party sample ballot, or just, can I talk to you about the constitutional amendments? And I talk to 85, 90% of the people that walk by. Maybe 10% don't want to talk. They go right to vote. Of the ones that talk to me, I've won over 100%. Every single one. So the folks that are answering polls, oh yes, they don't know what's in it. They've believed the Washington Post or some of the false information that Delegate Aird pointed out. Or remember, they've got millions of dollars. That's what Delegate Price will tell you, right? They got millions of dollars from out of state interests. The people that gerrymandered North Carolina are funding this so they can gerrymander Virginia. They've got us outspent 100 to 1. But if you will take your time to go to the polls, to do what Michael and Alex and Ben do, what I do, what I know my colleagues on this call have done, I have literally changed thousands of votes. And it's not because I'm a superstar. Ben and Alex and Michael have all changed thousands of votes. You stand out there for an hour and you will change 90% of the people that go there, because people don't understand what's in it. They don't know what it's all about. They're confused by it. It's intentionally designed to be confusing. And the most common response I get is thank you. I was so confused by this. Thank you for explaining this to me. Of course I'll vote no. And so some of those polls, you know, they're taken before people vote, but we changed the yes voters at the polls. So if y'all will help and just go to the polls, you know, we got Friday, Saturday, election day. If you believe in the no cause and you will get out there in your own communities and persuade people, it's actually really easy to persuade them. It's not like convincing them, you know, Biden or Trump. You know, you're not gonna change anybody's mind on that. On this amendment, you will change people's minds and you can make the difference tomorrow, Saturday on election day. Please help us. We could use your help.
Well, thank you all for joining us tonight.
Marcus gets the last word.
I got a last word. Well, there's a question in the chat, the Q&A. How would the citizens be picked in a hypothetical citizens commission? Google California Redistricting Commission selection process, and you'll see California has a great process. They have a website. It's great. It's what people think they're getting in Virginia. It's so cool. They're gonna be citizens. Where do I go to sign up, right? How do I apply? And so, you know, it's one of the big flaws with our commission. There are better ways to do it, right? And there are places where the Citizens Commission is not a pipe dream, right? People will tell you this is the best we can do, and it isn't. It just isn't. We can do better. We can expect more from Virginians. The reason we can do better is because you've got people who really believe in this in charge of the General Assembly now. The only reason we're stuck with the amendment we got is because it was all we could get Republicans to agree to in 2019. The only reason Republicans agreed to anything is because they knew they were about to lose an election, right? So they're like, they snuck this in. We can do better. We will do better. But the only way we get there, and that's what Mark's point was earlier, the only way we get there is by voting no today, tomorrow, and November 3rd. That's the only way we can get to a better solution, which is out there. I hope that everybody will help us get to the place where we can do the right thing.
Okay, so be sure to visit our website. It is fairdistrictsva.com. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We are in comments on Facebook. We are in mentions on Twitter at Fair Districts VA. Join us in the conversation. Join us in the fun of it all. And if you have anything to spare, join us as well on that front. But again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, panelists. This has been a great informative conversation, and we'll see you at the polls voting no on Amendment 1.